listed under other. Some upcoming events. Lunch with the League. We don't have the place yet, but we've got the time and the place. Johnson City listed, but just not specifically the restaurant. It'll be on October the 6th. Ruth listed is going to host. She's there in the back, but we will get the details on time and location in the newsletter. October the 11th, we have the Tri-Pride Parade. We're going to participate at Founders Park in Johnson City. Still looking for anyone who loves a parade, who would love to march with us. Let's just see any of the officers here today. And then the next one coming up, our next month's program is a very, very interesting, sort of panel discussion. Mandates in Main Street, the impacts of government actions on local communities. That's a mouthful. Ramsey came up with that one. But the presenters are from across the state. We've got Bandy Kemp from Blount County Board of Education. We've got Pamela Menz, who is the Associate Dean from ETSU, Professor of Special Education. Shannon Watkins has agreed to come from the Tennessee Justice Center. She's the Health Advocacy Program Manager. So they'll talk about the impacts that some of these federal cuts have had listed on their entities. Housekeeping. So restrooms are in the back, all the way to the back there listed. Feel free to pick up any buttons, pins, leaflets that we have on the table. We would ask that if enjoy the refreshments, but about 1/3 of our annual budget goes to the rental of this facility as well as refreshments. So please donate if you feel moved to. The other thing, we are going to live stream this. We're missing Bob and Noel today, but Julia has graciously stepped in to live stream this. So your faces won't be shown, only the speaker. But your voice, if it's easily recognizable like mine, let's just understand that you will be picked up by the mic. Okay, again, come next month, 1:30, so you can get to know more people. I feel like sometimes we're always rushed afterwards. Feel free to stick around with us today after the meeting if you want to get to know us. Or you just feel moved, how can I get involved? We're looking for more people besides the board. We have a wonderful board of 11 people. I couldn't do my job without them. Each and every one of them is just more than gold to me. Doubtless, we're always looking to include you on whatever level you'd like to get involved. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ramsey so she can introduce today's speaker.
The mic? So I'll say my own welcome and also mention that we have our meeting, as Candace talked about, next month, October 26th. And our November meeting will be the following week. They're back to back. So we're having a 2-part series. And that's unusual for us. Usually we meet once a month. So just be aware in advance that the second part of Mandates to Main Street, we'll be looking at what Main Street says about the mandates and what their opinions are for our region. So back to back, October 26th and the first weekend in November after that. But for today, we have an exciting program. We're very pleased and honored to have Dr. Heather Evans with us. You can see that she is the John Morton Beatty Professor of Political Science at the University of Virginia Wise. Her research interests include political engagement, competitive congressional elections, social media, and the effect of entertainment on political attitudes. She's the author of 3 published books and 1 forthcoming book that you might want to talk to her about after the presentation. And in addition to her role as a professor in political science, she's the director of experiential learning at UVA Wise and graduate studies. So she's busy. She has lots of irons in the fire, and we appreciate her taking time to come and speak to us today. She's going to help us try to understand how the competitiveness of elections are related to what we see in democracy in America. So thank you very much. I like to move a little bit. Okay.
everybody today? Thank y'all for coming out to hear me talk a little bit. I'm gonna head over here. I'm trying to get this in my back pocket.
Too far. Perfect.
Yes, we found the sweet spot. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Heather Evans. It's so nice to meet all of you. I recognize some of you from the last talk. I was here actually listening to Gail present a little bit about democracy as well. So thank you all for inviting me out to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's one that I've spent a lot of time researching, and I'm hoping today to share a little bit of that with you, some of the highlights of my research, as well as get us talking about what we can do as citizens to maybe increase competitiveness. So one of the things that I want to start with is actually getting a little bit of audience participation, if that's all right. When we think about competitive elections or competitiveness in general, what do you think are some things that happen because something is competitive? Do you see any positives or negatives to a contest, an election, be it local or national, being competitive? What are some things that happen when an election is competitive?
Get more voters turn out.
You get more voters, okay. Some others?
Good ideas.
Get different ideas. That's a good one too. Others? Yeah.
You get into personal attacks if it's very heated.
Okay, so you get some attacks, definitely. You might get more negative ads in some way. Yeah. Others?
It presents an opportunity to dig a little deeper into the issues.
Right, you might get more information in a competitive election, definitely. Anybody else?
Theoretically, you should get better candidates.
You should get better candidates. If something's close, you would think there would be more quality candidates in some way. Anyone else?
It can get very polarized.
It can get very polarized, right. So people might feel divided in your community if something's like a really hot race, right? So today, the title of what you guys were given and also the title on the screen, you'll see that it says Competitive Elections and Democracy in America, but it has a subtitle. And that subtitle is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Because not everything that is produced from competitive elections we might consider good. So I like to think about elections like a sporting event, right? Whether that's the Super Bowl or local football, high school football, college football. What are the most exciting football games to watch? When is it super exciting?
When it's close.
When it's close, right. We all tune in when it's close. My daughter plays an instrument in the band at Abingdon High School. And the other day, it was like their first game. And I hate to say that, it was a blowout, okay? It was that Abingdon did very well, and I'm not gonna say which team it was that was on the other side, but they did not do as well. And my mom was sitting next to me in the stands and eventually said, oh my God, like, can't they just let them score at this point? Like, why are we? So she was very, this is not good, right? This game is not great. And if you go to like some of these organizations that rank football games, the Super Bowl, as to whether they're like excellent or they're awful, they usually use how close it is to also determine whether something was excellent, right? So these games where it's like hanging on by a point, like we're not sure, it goes into overtime, that's seen as a great Super Bowl. And my mom ended up leaving that game, by the way, so she was like, I already know who's gonna win right after halftime. My daughter performed and she's like, I'm out. And I get it. So one of the things that somebody mentioned to begin with was turnout. The idea that if you have a competitive race, the turnout's gonna go up, right? More people are gonna engage. We think about our presidential elections when they're super close and we don't know, and forecasters are like, we don't know who's gonna win. And maybe there could be somebody winning the popular vote and somebody else winning the electoral college vote, like, oh my gosh, every vote. Turnout goes up. Something else that students talk about a lot, and I do as well because I'm interested in congressional elections, is that our attitudes towards the people in there, or even our attitudes towards Congress as a body or government as a body, those things can change on the basis of whether there's a competitive race in our district or not. So you may feel differently about your representative if they've never had a competitive race versus if they have. So towards government, the same thing, whether you think government hears you, you have high levels of political efficacy or not. Political knowledge, somebody else mentioned knowledge, that your knowledge is going to go up. You're going to know more. You're going to know more about the issues, and it might actually spill over into political interest. So you, by having a competitive race, we hope that means that people are more engaged, which means they're getting more information, which means they're going to know more about the elections, and maybe they're going to stay engaged, hopefully. And then this bottom one, though, is one that is about happiness. So the idea that if it's super close, like a football game, right? Think about it. You've got two teams going against each other, and at the end of the, it's 1 point. 1 point is all the wins. Half of those people are going to leave that stadium, and they're going to be angry. That is also something we see in elections, right? When you've got two people competing and it's super close, and then boom, there's a winner. Well, a whole lot of people are upset because their person didn't win. So in terms of thinking about whether competitiveness is good or bad, there are actually 3 of us who have written books on this topic and looking at it in different ways. So the first book over at the top of the screen, this is by Brunel. The title of the book is Redistricting and Representation, and he actually looks at the happiness factor. So the idea that in an election where it's super close, you're going to have a lot of people get upset because you're going to have about 49%, right, who didn't pick the winner. Their person didn't get in there, but he shows in his book that the happiness factor is connected to feeling like you can make a difference in government, and so then you feel more apathy towards government, and then you just don't engage. So that's his argument. Then we have Qn50yeQJjGLMVWnrWeVBbpZi2H8Yn7us0D0TMM, who wrote a book titled Competitive Elections and the American Voter. And for her, she sees it as there's tons of, there's all these things we're going to test. Does it affect voter turnout? Does it affect knowledge? Does it affect interest? And she shows that it does. It does affect these things. So I also wrote a book on this, but I tried to combine the two because I actually think the two authors kind of talk across one another. So they're looking at different measures as to how competitive elections can affect us. And they also don't test whether these things remain. So it's like, you have that football game and you come really close to winning. Do those feelings hang on? I mean, for some sports fanatics, they do, right? Like, how long does the anger last, right? Or how long does the additional participation last? Are they more likely to say they'll engage next time if they just had a competitive race? So in the book that I wrote, this was back in 2014, I was actually telling Gail a few minutes ago that in doing this presentation for today, I got my book down again and started reading it again and realized that I am definitely going to be updating this soon. The book looks at a series of elections. So we're going from like a multi-year time period, and I've got data from within periods of time when there are no congressional elections. And I'm looking at, if you had a congressional election last time, and now you had one and it was competitive, what's the spillover effects? Does it remain? Do the effects last? So I have data from the Competitive Congressional Election Study, and then I also have some Twitter data, which I'm not going to get into today, but I'm happy to talk about it at the end because the one book that Ramsey mentioned at the beginning, I actually just found out 2 days ago that the reviews are back on that. The second round of reviews are back on that. It's super positive, which means it's moving forward to publication, which is great. But it looks at Twitter from 2012 until now and how polarizing the conversation is on there. But I'm happy to talk about that later. Today I'm just going to focus on those main things that we just discussed. So things like, does it increase turnout? Does it increase political knowledge? But what about attitudes towards your representative? Do you end up hating them more if you have a competitive race? Do you end up hating government more if you have a competitive, like those sorts of things. And let's get into it. So the good. Some of you mentioned the good, right? These things that can happen that are really positive if you have a competitive election. So on the screen right now, there's an image. I don't know how many of you remember the 2018 election, Senate election between Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz. this was a very competitive race, especially for Texas. So Texas is one of those states where my students, I'll be honest, so I taught in Texas for 10 years, and I loved my time in Texas. Students would say to me, I don't feel like I should engage. Because if they were to the left of the political spectrum, they thought, well, it's already in the bag, the Republicans are going to take it. And then if they were to the right of the political spectrum, they're like, well, we already know who's going to win, so why should I engage? This was a great race because it engaged young people. So on campuses, my campus included, I worked at Sam Houston State University. Beto O'Rourke came out multiple times. Then we started to see a little more Ted Cruz. We started to hear more campaigning. Right? The positives from these types of elections are that people are going to engage. So technically, all of these voters, new voters, technically, we think about young people specifically, they're going to be more likely to engage in the election. So they're going to know more, they're going to get more information. Even if the ads are negative, they're still getting information. And, you know, think about your own representative. How often do your representatives have to come home to hold a town hall with people and to talk about what they are doing? If you live in a place that is not competitive, probably not that often. But if they get a challenger that is a strong challenger, then they do have to come home more often, and they have to send out more newsletters and talk a little bit more. So that happens in races everywhere, from local elections to national elections. So engagement, interest, all of this is supposed to be a spillover effect from competitiveness. But again, scholars have not looked at whether these things are long lasting. Now the bad, so we got the good, what's the bad? The bad idea, again, is that our attitudes are affected. So we get into these races and then we find out that we're really unhappy. Like somebody wins and it's not the person we picked, and so we're really upset about that. And technically then that relates to our efficacy, our political efficacy, feeling like we're connected to government or we can make a difference, and then that spills over also into whether we vote or whether we engage. But again, do these things last? So I want to back up briefly, physically and just metaphorically speaking. I asked you guys the question about competitiveness. How would you define what is a competitive race? What do you think would make something competitive? I heard Gail said something about maybe a quality challenger. How would we say this is a competitive race? This is not. What would be a good definition of that? Do we know? Yeah.
One characteristic is two candidates that both have substantial support. We'll just start with that.
Yeah, okay. Two candidates and they both have a decent level of support, right? And it's one of those where it's technically we like to use the word close. We don't know who's going to win. It's just like the football team. We don't know it's at halftime, it's tied, right? It's after third quarter, it's tied. We're going to the bottom of, it's still tied. Yeah.
Another potential is if you've got two new people running for an office.
Yes, so open seat races. Someone was in there, an incumbent, and they're not running now. And so now we have two brand new people. And absolutely, we find more competitiveness there than we do in other races. So hold on to that, because we're going to come back to that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I measure competitiveness in the book, and then we'll talk more about that as well later. Here's some of the things that I'm able to use using the CCES data, and this goes across multiple years. For the good, I can measure how much knowledge do you have about your representative. We would think that in a competitive race, you'd have more knowledge, right? You'd know more about what that person stands for, you know more about their party, you know more about their positions. Okay. Knowledge of Congress, just kind of like knowing who's in charge of Congress, like which party's in control, even just basic knowledge about Congress. Things like how long does a House member have in office before they face re-election? Anything like that. Even things about issues that are being addressed, you should know more about those if you're in a competitive race. Then we have self-reported political interest. So one would hope that if you have a competitive race, that maybe your interest level in politics in general is going to go up, and maybe you watch more news. And then there's the political engagement, the idea that you're going to be more likely to be a registered voter and you're going to turn out. Because if it's close, we think it matters more. Right? Then on the other side, the bad, the variables that can be used for that. Well, we have Congress approval. Do you approve or not of the way Congress is doing its job? I don't know if it's going to become as a shock to any of you, but most of us do not approve of Congress. We are more likely to approve of our own representative than we do of Congress as a whole, but Congress's approval, and I have a chart on this in a minute, has hovered around like upper 20s, low 30s for quite some time, and there's events that make it drop and spike, but in general, we don't really like Congress. And there's reasons for that, right? It's slow, there's a whole lot of people in there, right? I don't know, even in terms of the makeup, like many of us are unhappy with the way in which it operates. Then we have representative approval. So again, our representative approval tends to be higher than our congressional approval. Whether we think that Congress listens to us, whether we trust Congress, and then we can also look at what grade we give Congress. Do we give them high grades or low grades on a bunch of different things? So these are the variables that I had access to when I was doing this project. Now, in terms of that competitiveness, right? Two people, it doesn't mean that you just have two people running, although that's the start, right? If you have an election where there's no one, that's frustrating, right? We want to have some candidates running, but having them be close, right? Having candidates who are coming in neck and neck. There are scholars who've measured this very differently. Some will say it's the measure between kind of like, if we look at the percentage of votes they get in the end, where are they? Is it 50.1%, right? How many votes are they winning out of the two-party vote? What I use in the book is measures of competitiveness before the election, which I think is a better way to measure this, because I think that, for instance, if you're going to send tweets or ads or what have you, you're more likely to change the way you engage with your constituents if you think you're in a competitive race. Not just at the end of the day whether you were in one. When the votes are tallied, of course we can tell if this one was competitive, but if we can go back 2 months before the election and say, oh, this election's going to be close, then that representative is going to be more likely to show up at town halls and do those kinds of things, right? Let's go talk to our constituents because they think it is going to be close. So I use the they think it's going to be close measure. Now, some of the variables that can affect whether some of these good effects happen and these bad effects happen. So I also measure things like whether you live in a swing state, whether you have a competitive Senate race. Now, I'm only looking in this at competitive congressional elections, so 435 races. Your race, your gender, your age, your education, your income, ideology, party ID. And then on the bad side, you'll see a couple other variables here like presidential approval, because presidential approval also is tied with congressional approval. So these are all of the independent variables of my study. So now let's get into what I find. Are competitive elections actually good for us, right? We hope they are. Like we're eating our cereal every day. Competitive elections are good. So in the end, do citizens know more? Yes. Yes, they do. Citizens know more about their representatives. They know more about politics. They know more about everything if they're in competitive races. But the effects don't last. So during the election, they know a lot more. And then it's like, we just kind of lose it. We're not as engaged. We don't know as much later. Come back to that. And then the second one about political interest, the effects are mixed on this. So there's some effect for people being more interested in politics if they have a competitive race. But as you'll see here, in 2011, there was more interest. In 2008, there was less. So it depends on the year. Now, this is tricky. So with this data, which goes up through 2012, what I show is that there's no difference in overall, if we look at all the citizens, everyone, okay? There's no difference in the competitive, non-competitive, and their media use or their turnout, but hold on, there's more coming. However, citizens were more likely to attend a meeting with their member of Congress back in 2009 if they had been in a competitive race. So there's this engagement that gets turned on for people that even goes beyond voting. So we're engaging in other ways. Now, I said hold on to that top bullet because of this. Now, it's one thing to engage people who have already been engaged. It is another thing to engage people who have not. What my work shows is that the people who are impacted by competitive elections are those who don't vote, who haven't voted yet. So if we look at people who are first-time voters or new, like young people, these are the people who this impacts the most. So low interest individuals, those who say, I just don't really have a lot of interest anyways, they're the ones who get engaged by competitive elections. And then again, as I mentioned, younger people as well are the ones who are engaging. So these first-time individuals, people who aren't really paying, I'm a voter, I vote all the time, so I'm going to come out no matter what. It's the people who are not as engaged as everyone else. It does impact them, which means on the whole, when everything shakes out, it looks like, oh, well, it doesn't really impact. It does. All right, now to the bad. All right, so remember, the bad part of this is maybe people are just going to be upset, right? People are not going to like their representative. They're not going to like Congress. Okay, this is the mean levels of congressional approval and representative approval from 2007 to 2011. You see a little fluctuation here, but one thing I want to point out is notice what I said before. Congress approval, pretty negative, right? The other one, there's not a negative sign next to it. What that means, again, is that you're more likely to like your person than you are to like the whole body. Up at the top, we also have a chart on congressional approval in general. This goes up through 2024, and we don't really like Congress. We just don't. We don't approve of it in general. However, now let's see what competitive elections can do for us. Does it make it worse or better? So the first set of results that I'm going to show you here are for your representative's approval. So the idea that if it's close and somebody wins, you're going to be less likely to like them, that's true. Okay, so if you're in a competitive race, see how all of those are negative? Then there's some stars next to the last three. The stars mean that's significant. So that means that at least in those 3 years, there was a significant difference between those who lived in a competitive race and those who did not, and how they ranked their own person. So overall, it seems like those in competitive races don't really like their person, but it doesn't become significant until 2009 and forward. So if you're in a competitive race, you're less likely to report that you like the person who's serving for you in Congress. Now, when it comes to Congress overall, so congressional approval, what we also see is it's somewhat negative, not every year. You'll notice it's kind of zero. Like in 2008, it's like 0.01. That's not really much at all. It only dings as being significant as if I ask you whether you approve of Congress, what is your opinion? And I'm going to split you in half, those in competitive races and those who aren't. In 2010, there was a significant difference between these groups. Those who were in competitive races were more likely to say they hated Congress, or they were less likely to approve of Congress. So Brunel isn't totally wrong, right? The idea that if we were in a competitive race, we're going to be less likely to like our person, that shakes out, and also it looks like maybe Congress in general for some years. So let's put it all together. What does all of this mean? So this is the good, the bad. We'll talk about the ugly in a minute. So competitiveness does increase participation among people, especially those who are low participators anyways, those who don't have a lot of information and knowledge and interest. People who are younger are going to be, they're going to want to vote if they see a competitive race, so it's so important. Now, competitiveness does, as I mentioned, decrease our levels of citizen, like our approval of our person, our approval of Congress. That's all true. So in the end, Brunel and Lipsitz, it's like both of their arguments are working, and it's different year to year, right? It doesn't always pan out, and sometimes in the middle, we find these effects that last. So that's kind of cool for us to know that when we're working on elections. So I like to think about this, we can either have people who know a lot and are unhappy, or people who don't know very much and are pretty content. I am of the thought that I would prefer for people to know a lot and be a little unhappy than to be the reverse. So I like this t-shirt, right? I'm not interested in politics, I just want to be happy. I think that's, that's one argument that could be made from this. But again, I'm not on that side of the fence. I'm more of a have competitive elections. We need them. We need them for engagement. Otherwise, we don't engage at all. And it's the same people over and over and over again. And so we want people to show up and talk to us about why they've done certain policies. And even if they end up winning again, we should want to have a competitive race. So what can we do to affect whether elections are competitive? All right, so yeah, that first bullet up there. I know we really can't do much about that one, but there is something to be said, and in the book I talk about redistricting. So in states that allow an independent commission to redistrict, we see more competitive districts, than in states where there aren't independent commissions. So I do make that suggestion in the book, but in terms of just citizens in general, honestly, increasing knowledge that people have about how elections work, which I think is one of the primary goals of the League. I was actually in the League of Women Voters in Washington County, Virginia for multiple years, and I also work with them on voter engagement at UVA-Wise. And so I think the work that the League does helps increase the competitiveness everywhere. So increasing the knowledge that citizens have about how elections work, obviously, and also among youth. So young people is where it's at, that really is where it's at. That and then again, people who are just not interested at all. But you have kind of a captive audience when they're young. I think that helps in terms of just getting them engaged, and then they stay engaged. Ballot access for candidates in various states, those with lower levels of the things you have to do to become a candidate. We see more people running in those races, and even helping out candidates who are thinking about running, but they don't know how. So I have a lot of students who say they want to run in an election one day, they want to be a candidate, they don't know where to start. And so having things where you invite individuals who think they want to run and teach them about how this works. I try to do that in my classes. I actually ran for office a couple years ago, and so I take my experience into the classroom and I say, here is how you deal with all the federal election stuff. Here's how you do the local election stuff. Here's how to, get donations and those sorts of things. Here's how to go door knocking. Here's how to get signs. I think that there are a lot of people who think about running, but they don't step forward because they don't know how. And so I think one of the things that we can always do is encourage people to run and host things like that. Candidate forums. So if you have two candidates and they're not equal, usually, open seat races are different because with open seats, everyone's on equal footing. But when you have an incumbent and someone else, it can be discouraging for that someone else because they don't have the resources that the incumbent does. So having events where candidates can come in and get to know their voters and talk about their ideas and perhaps be asked the same questions as the incumbents at a forum or a debate, those are good. Those things encourage people to turn it, let's go vote. Because now we've heard from this candidate, we know this candidate, we know what they're about, we know how they're different than the other candidate. So all of that is positive. And then I've got this little snippet down here because I know here in Tennessee, you guys are not known for lots of competitive races, but you do have a couple that are on the horizon for different offices, even it looks like governor. So we, in thinking about what does it mean if you've got something close, people will engage if they get that information out. And I want to leave you with this video. I'm hoping that it works. I'm going to try. Let's see if I can get it to work today. Hopefully. It's not coming up. Let me pause this. Hold on one moment. I'm going to try to do something funky. See if my professorial skills are going to pay off here. Oh, look at that. It worked.
Their house in 2017 and literally with a tie.
Yes, that is my claim to fame. Well, now I'm a delegate in the Virginia House.
Okay.
But it took me 3 tries to get elected. The second time I ran, it came down to 1 vote. The first day of the recount, I won by 1 vote.
Okay.
And then when the judges certified the race, they took a vote away, which is pretty unprecedented.
Right, no kidding.
And then it became a tie.
So what happens in Virginia if there's a tie?
So if there's a tie, they have something called a drawing of lots. And in this case, they found a very fancy bowl, and they put 2 names in film canisters.
No kidding.
And then the head of the committee swirled the names around and picked one out.
It was 2 names.
Yeah, and it was crazy because the whole Virginia depended on this, you know.
But it actually made the difference between who held the majority in the House.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a critical, and Medicaid expansion was on the line.
Oh, wow.
So there was so much at stake.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So that's the importance of 1 vote. 1 vote counts.
1 vote counts. And you know what? Every year I experience this kind of confessional. Every year somebody comes and says, Shelley, it was me. I was the one. I was sick that day, or I planned my vacation wrong and I was actually out of town. It's just another reason I'm so excited that we do have early voting in Virginia. You can vote absentee.
Right.
They even have souls to the polls. They have Sunday voting nowadays. So I just, you know, you don't want to be the one person. You don't want to be the one vote that is the difference between getting health care or improving our schools. I mean, you don't want to be that guy.
Where can we learn more about your platform, your stance on these issues, and just everything?
Oh, thank you. Well, ShelleySimons.com. Simons for...
All right, I'm going to pause it there. So this is an example of a super competitive race, one in which she at first had won by a single vote, and then in the end there was a vote that had been thrown out, which meant that they put their names in canisters and literally took their arm and then pulled out, and then she ended up losing. So like, that was the first, that was that time. She eventually won next time around. But that's an example of a competitive race in Virginia. And again, the reason I wanted to use this example here is because competitive races can have lasting impacts on policy. Whether you're to the left or the right, wherever you sit on this political spectrum, having people in there who, you know, think the way that you do, it can matter for policies that you want to see in the future. So with that said, I think that was my last slide. I know that I did not, double check, yep, we're good. I would love to hear from y'all about competitive elections. So do you have any questions for me about all of this?
I don't have any questions, but I was curious of what.
Can you hear me? Over
Yes.
this? Okay. If you wait for the mic, then it'll show up on the recording.
We're not hearing. Oh, you gotta wait for a mic? Oh, okay.
You're not hearing? It just has to be close.
Oh, okay. I thought I talked loud enough.
Okay, I do talk fairly loud. Okay, I had 4 brothers, so I talk real loud. Okay.
Perfect.
One of the things for me would greatly increase competitiveness is term limits for Congress. And of course, I mean, that means changing the Constitution. And you've got the foxes guarding the hen house, so that's extremely unlikely. But if they would change representatives to, instead of a 2-year period, which is ridiculous, change it to 4 years, and then change the Senate to 3 6 years. And it increases as it is right now, you have people in there for 50 years, and people say, oh, well, you know, we do have competitiveness because people are allowed to, but we're humans. We want the devil we know. We don't want the devil we don't know.
Thank you for that.
Well, my question is what do you think about term limits for Congress?
Thank you. So students, and I actually talk about term limits a lot, I've told them that if I'm ever invited to give a TED Talk, that it will potentially be on term limits. I say that also because you're not going to like what I say. And it's only because of the research, and I agree with you. Most of us sit and think term limits would be really, really good, right? Term limits would be fantastic. If we had term limits, we wouldn't have people in there, the Mitch McConnells, the Nancy Pelosi's, people would retire, and then we would have new blood, fresh new faces, all that, right? Different policies and things. So, political science research, we are unable to really take Congress, layer term limits on it, and then see what it does. We can't do that, but we do have 50 state laboratories where we can play around with this, and we have. So there's some state legislatures that have term limits, and we have measures of competitiveness before and after, things, and other measures that we think that we might like to see, or that we hope we'll see. Like, are the people a little younger? Are they a little more representative, perhaps? Are they, what kind of policies are they after? And what state legislative studies have shown, so those people in political science who are focused on state legislatures, they show that actually a lot of the stuff that we think we're going to get when we go to term limits, we don't actually get. We end up with people who are more like these politicians that have been in other positions, and then they're just kind of like constantly in other positions within government. So in some of the places in the United States that have term limits, if you look before the term limits and then after the term limits, the young part doesn't really pay off. The more diversity, because some people want to, see more diversity in these offices, that doesn't really pay off. Even the policy positions doesn't really pay off. I will say there's one positive though, you get more women. So that's one positive to doing term limits, but it is sticky. Because it is one of those where if we put it on there, what happens? Now, the other negative effect of layering on term limits, in state legislatures that have them, the governor gets more power. Because the state legislative individuals, because they're term limited out, the governor, so it would mean that the president would get more power if we had term limits in Congress. So it's a sticky topic, and I know my students will say, we need term limits, and I would love to see more young people in Congress, but I'm not sure term limits is how we get there.
Doesn't that really depend upon how long the term limits are?
Yeah, so the question was about length of term limit. Yeah, the length of term limit. I'd have to look into that. I know that just in terms of the legislative research, it's just if you've had them or not. I don't know of one right now that looks at the number of years, but that's an interesting point, definitely.
So I'm going to take a
Good question.
privilege as holding the microphone and ask if there's any information about the influence of money in competitiveness of elections, money in elections.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so the one election that I had on the screen a few minutes ago between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, one of the things that you can tell if an election is going to be competitive when an incumbent starts spending money. And in that election, Beto raised a lot of money, like more than Cruz. And as soon as Cruz thought it was competitive, he started spending. But it's very difficult for us to have competitive elections due to the amount of money you need to run these elections. Absolutely.
I was going to ask about money in elections.
Oh, you were, yay.
But
yes.
What about, my mind went blank. Where they are limited in the amount of public financing.
Yes. No, and if we were to actually go just straight to public financing, period, in terms of equaling the playing field, we'd have more competitive elections. Absolutely. Any other questions? I hope you all have enjoyed my football analogies today. I thought about it too as I put the picture up there. I'm like, I don't even know which football game that was. So if you guys ask me that question, I'm going to be completely clueless. You will know more than I do. I just know that it was a Super Bowl.
Didn't we have public funding for elections back in the day?
Yes. And today, though, what we find is that most candidates do not really do that. And it depends on also what office individuals are seeking and what state. So one of the the frustrating pieces for people who are wanting to run for Congress is that you have, first it's in where you get your money, and then there's the super PACs that are outside of traditional campaign finance as well. They sit kind of outside the laws for that. So, and if we're able to deal with that as a country, we might see more competitive races as well.
Can you explain public funding versus the private funding?
Public funding is where it is from the public itself. So in other words, we are allotting X number of dollars per candidate as they're running. Whereas if it's not with public funding and candidates are just allowed to raise and spend as they want, we see candidates raising a lot of money, and we have these war chests that individuals have as well. So it's significantly more money that's being spent on elections when you do not have that form of spending or that form of money that's being used. And candidates can decide whether they want to do that or not. Most candidates say, I'm just going to raise and spend as I wish. And then you've got the outside groups that are also doing the same. Yeah.
I understand your research is on congressional races. Is there any information you could share about competitiveness in local elections, which is a very different context, but we're curious about increasing interest in local elections as well?
Yeah, so these effects actually hold for local things as well. I know that as the league here, that you guys have also been going out to some meetings, some local meetings, and listening in and sharing that information out, which is fantastic. We have a death of local newspapers in this country that I think is leading people to not really knowing what's going on in this country or even in their home communities. So the fact that you do that is wonderful. In doing that, you can also encourage people to run. If people have multiple candidates on the ballot, they're going to be more likely to turn out for that election. So even if I mentioned that competitiveness is kind of like you have two candidates that are running neck and neck, even if you don't have them running neck and neck and you still have a second candidate, it increases voter turnout, people being interested in the election. So that doesn't matter what level. And then what I also want to say is that a lot of the things that directly affect our lives, that's local, that's not national. So a lot of the time in my classes, we spend me talking to students about like, how does government affect you? Like, oh, it doesn't. That's Congress. It's nothing, doesn't matter. Maybe taxes, like I don't know how else it's gonna impact me. And then when we start to whittle it down to, well, what about what happens right now on your street? Whether that pothole gets fixed, whether there's funding for education in your state, whether there's funding for your school, at least at UVA-wise, the funding that we get from the state legislature, things like that. Then they start to be like, oh, and these local elections are really where things are happening that impact everybody on a daily basis. So I would say, you know, no matter what we can do, try to do all that we can to encourage local candidates to run. These impacts are the same though. If you've got local people running and they're neck and neck and they're having these candidate forums and people are finding out about them, younger people are going to be more likely to engage, they're going to be more interested, they're going to keep engaging.
I have a question with regard to AI. She's next and then you, okay? She has the
My question is on moderation. It seems like we're getting more and more extreme in our candidates. So if one candidate is extreme on one side, the other one has to be extreme on the other side. And how do we get back to moderation?
Get rid of the parties. So that's a great point. And actually, when I was doing this for today, I was thinking about how it's a little different now. So for instance, in those variables I had before, I had party ID and ideology. Those weren't really significant in my models. I'd be willing to bet they are now, because those two now kind of match up, and then it also pulls people to the opposite sides. It would be fantastic if we had elections that weren't partisan. I don't see that happening, at least not nationally or at the congressional level, but locally. Some states do have that, depending on the office. And in those instances, then people are not necessarily voting on party lines. It's just coming to these events and listening to candidates and then making a decision. And that would be wonderful if it was possible nationally, but I don't necessarily see it happening. But the polarization of the parties, and people are kind of like going along and like sorting with them. The individuals at the top sorted first, and then everybody at the bottom sorted with them.
Have you done any, or is there any research as to how if AI will affect any of this?
I have not. However, my students and I have been talking about AI and the use of ads and the types of images we're going to see. I mean, if you even look on Facebook and any other form of social media at this point, you may stumble upon things and think it's real when it's really not. And if we have super PACs and other organizations putting out ads that are not necessarily truthful, right, how does this impact individuals in terms of their vote? I do think that AI images and produced videos can have an impact in the future. The one piece I didn't talk about here was the ugly. So my work is also on Twitter. So I have all the tweets that every candidate has sent from 2012 to 2024 who run for congressional seats. So the U.S. House, if you ran, even if you were a third-party candidate, I have your tweets, and I have them for the last 2 months that you ran. I've been doing work on that for years now. And what I show is that when you add on competitiveness, measured in the same way, so we're gonna look at the forecasts, that the tweets get more negative, that all of that kind of, you know, it's more nasty, it's somewhat less truthful, some of that information is less truthful, and so I think AI can impact that as well, although what I'm looking at is the things that the candidate themselves are sending out, not what the outside groups are doing. So I have no doubt that AI will affect things in the future just because of the ability people have to be able to make things that aren't necessarily true. Yeah.
There are people who have already asked questions that want to ask even more, but I want to make sure anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet, if you have a question you want to, let's make sure that you get a chance to pose what you're interested in.
How does the redistricting increase competitive, other than making people mad?
Okay, so usually when it comes to redistricting, it's done every 10 years. I know that isn't what's been happening recently, but I'll say typically it's after the census, right? We count how many people are in each state, we do have seats, and then depending on the state, either the state legislature draws it or an independent commission. Or some other group that's kind of a combination of the legislature and something else. What the research shows is that if the legislature itself, the state legislature draws those lines, it's going to be less competitive. Because what happens is that the people who are in there kind of want to keep them in there, so there's a little pro-incumbent gerrymandering going on, but then also there's partisan gerrymandering. So depending on the state you're in, if it's majorly controlled by those who are Republican or those who are Democrat, they are going to draw the lines accordingly so that they get that kind of leg up for the congressional races. In the states, though, where it is an independent commission, we have more competitive races. So they're more likely to draw the lines less on the basis of party or incumbency than those who they know who the legislators are, so they're going to draw it accordingly. So yeah, in the book I say it would be great if we could just all move to the independent commissions. Everybody, just let somebody else draw these things for you, and we'll all be better off for it. But we're you know, some states have worked towards having independent commissions even since the book came out. Even in Virginia, it's a little more independent than it used to be, and we do see more competitiveness. Like it's less gerrymandered now. So so these are all positive things.
My question would be, or statement would be about the length of time that we go through elections, the amount of money that goes into the elections, and fact checking of the elections. Could any of these actually happen?
Does the fact checking happen? It does. It does, although research is mixed on like the impact of that. So depending on, you know, whether the person being fact checked is your own person or not can impact then how you feel about them. The same is true with negativity in elections. So depending on, one of the negatives is, of course, you're going to get hit with more negative ads if you're in a competitive race. There was a debate in the literature for a while as to whether negativity would make people stay home or turn out. Turns out it depends. It depends on when you get that negativity. It depends on when you get those fact checks. So are you getting those fact checks early on, or are you getting them right before the election? And with negativity, if you see negativity, negative ads and things like that, if it's right before the election, you've already picked who you're going to vote for. It doesn't make you switch teams. It doesn't make you go, ooh, I'm going to vote for that other person. It just makes you stay home. And so the timing matters for both of those kinds of things.
I think we'll take one more question and then wrap up what's been a very informative program.
Can you explain Citizens United and how that has
Ooh,
affected
Lord, I would need a whole other hour and a half.
Some people don't know what Citizens
Dark money is bad. Let's just, Citizens United is essentially, well, Citizens United and Speech Now. They are Supreme Court cases that essentially allowed the creation of super PACs. So these are organizations that exist outside the traditional political action committee structure. And they can raise as much money as they want, and they can spend as much money as they want, and they can do so even including from dark money, meaning that people can donate in kind of a backdoor way so that you never know who's fitting the bill. And I don't have it on this, I do have a thumb drive somewhere with like the statistics on that, but then the amount of money that's being spent by outside groups, as soon as those two Supreme Court cases were heard and decided, it ballooned. Mm-hmm. And so now we have so much spending in elections, but a lot of it is from these outside groups. And because they don't have to report who's funding them, that means, you know, for a candidate, let's say I'm running for Congress, I have to report who's giving me money, and they can only give me so much money. But if I was running and there was a, you know, a super PAC that liked me, they could go around and say, oh, I'll take $1 million from you, I'll take $1 million from you, and there's no real limits. They do have to report out essentially the amount, but with the dark money part of this, you don't have to tell who gave it to you. So we never really know. And so when I talk about that in class, it's like we use like Star Wars, like the Death Star. And so a lot of candidates have campaigned on, we need to get rid of super PACs, because that is definitely not leveling the playing field for candidates. Because if you've got these super PACs that can spend at whim, here we are, you know, and they're going to be spending for, say, an incumbent and not a challenger, depending on how well that challenger is known. So at the end of the day, I'm pro, let's get rid of all of that too, super PACs.
Do you think it'll ever be overturned?
It would take another Supreme Court case at this point. I don't know. I mean, again, or Congress could pass something that did, you know, I like the laughter. Yeah. So.
Dr. Evans, we thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there are some people who want to ask follow-up questions, and maybe
please
afterwards
stay.
They can come up and talk to you. But thank you for sharing your expertise and being willing to let us pick your brain about what happens in competitive elections. And I think we all probably have a little more thorough understanding of maybe the complicated nature of thinking that through. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.